Andrew, it's really wonderful that you've coming to join us, because it so fits with what we're trying to do with Earth Conversations. In Earth Conversations, we're trying to bring together international speakers globally, but we're also trying to bring together themes of reflection and inquiry. So we're not just saying ideas are wonderful, we're saying we need to think about how we do things, how we act, our ethics and our values. So it's really brilliant to have you with us. And also, after one of our last meetings, one of our members, Mike Zeidler, who was actually a founder member of ASP, he said he thought Earth Conversations were like a steady beacon of light. And we really like that, shining in what particularly, I think, in parts of the world now is quite troubled times. And just to say to you all that we really would like to see Earth Conversations continuing, not just this year, next year, but we're thinking of this decade, because we do know this is the decade when we really need to make a difference. So it's absolutely wonderful to have you here, Andrew. And I'm now going to pass on to Jagish, who's going to say a few words of Pacific welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Helena. Thank you, Gun. Thank you, friends, for coming. And thank you, Andrew, for taking the time. Andrew, as you can see, we are a very small group. We like to call ourselves a niche group, but we are very small. And that you have taken the time to be with us says a lot. We are really grateful, and I think we'll get some new insights of the kind we have not had thus far in Earth Conversations. So this is a very, very important conversation for us. And to the rest of our group, friends, some names do capture some imagination. At one time, it was Paul Pullman. I think there was an event at the Side Business School, and the dean got up and told his faculty and his students, if we want to be that school in sustainability, who should we look to? And he said, we'd like to be the Paul Pullman of these schools. And Paul Pullman is the co-author with Andrew Winston of the latest book that is really doing very well. In these days, if you are in the field of sustainability, Andrew Winston is the name you cannot probably miss. And almost like a buzzword when it comes to sustainability, though I don't know if this is complimenting you or stereotyping you and if it's positive or negative, but Andrew Winston will be there and his voice will be there. His books, blogs, articles, tweets, he's one of the most read person, so it's very, very influential. People listen to him, they read him, and he has a wide following. Very briefly, his books, well known though they are, I will name them, the ones that I know: The Big Pivot, Green to Gold, Net Positive, of course, co-authored with Paul Pullman. He's written for magazines, he's written for B School journals. I think MIT Sloan Review is one of them. So he's there. And this is probably the first time we get deeper into understanding the business side of how sustainability can work in today's world. We have had quite a bit of a leaning on activists talking to us. We have had Satish Kumar, we have had Vandana Shiva. We asked some very difficult questions. Today, we are probably sitting with Andrew on the boardroom table to see how businesses can actually make a change. And Andrew, is that a fair way to describe you? And if it is, yeah, let's hear it from you, and maybe over to you. And we hear an opening conversation from you, then we'll go into Q&A after some time. Is it okay?
Well, I mean, it would be, I don't know if there's time, it would be helpful for me to know who you all are, if there's time to do a quick round of, role, company really, really quickly, or if one of you wants to summarize who everybody is.
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, Andrew, I'll go immediately. I'm a journalist. I'm based in Mumbai, India. I'm an academic. I teach in the area of ethics, business and society, parts of sustainability, and leadership. I've been a journalist for more than 30 years, took time off, and now into teaching. I'm also a director at the Association of Sustainability Practitioners with Helena Gwen and many others. Helena?
Hi, everyone. Hi, Andrew. My name is Helena Kettleborough. I'm a teacher at Manchester Metropolitan University, which is a huge university. We have 35,000 students, and we have a large business school, and sustainability is one of our key areas. I'm also a community activist. I'm interested in making changes on the ground. And finally, I'm also a writer and a teacher in my own time outside university, and I've just finished my own book, Journey to Hopeful Futures, a handbook, which I hope to be launching this summer. Thank you.
Andrew Curry. Could you go next, please?
Yeah, I'm director of Futures. I'm Andrew Curry. I'm a director of Futures at a non-profit futures practice called SOIF, the School of International Futures. And this kind of area that you're in is sort of becoming more important to our practice.
Super, thanks. And Celine McKeon, are you ready to introduce yourself?
Hi. Yeah, I work for my own organization called Do What Matters, which is about helping leaders and organizations with purpose, meaning, and impact. And I started my career at Unilever, so fond memories. And I also work with Map of Meaning International, and that's a not-for-profit organization which is about creating opportunities for meaningful work based on the Map of Meaning.
Super, thanks. Claire next, please.
Hello, apologies, I'm on my phone. Hi, I'm Claire. I am sustainability lead, or I'm in the process of transitioning to be sustainability lead for global medical device company. And as we look to further implement a focus on sustainability and to really, look at how we can provide solutions for patient health while, really deeply considering planetary health.
Thanks very much. David Matthews.
Hi, Gwyn, thanks. Yeah, I'm David, and I run a small 3-person consultancy that helps food and drink businesses become more resilient, more sustainable, and challenge some of the problems with our local and independent food systems.
Super. And Isabel Ripper, please.
Hi, everybody. Very happy to be listening to you, Andrew, today. I'm based in Spain. I'm a biologist by training, and I work on environmental and sustainability issues as independent consultant.
Thanks, Isabella. And Jan Cafiero.
Hello, Andrew. So my interest is in health and well-being and where that meets the land. So I teach nature connection for well-being. I'm also interested in community activation for bioregional regeneration.
Super. And Jane in Canada, Jane Shaw.
I'm currently in Canada, although I am a Brit. I do ethical marketing, training and consultancy, and also writing and journalism around how we transition to a more regenerative, sustainable way of living.
Thanks, Jane. Jonathan Bowring, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm a leadership and organizational coach. I work with all sorts of charitable organizations, leaders and leadership teams, but increasingly I want to be doing what I do with organizations and leaders who are working in the sustainability arena.
Super. Hi, Jonathan. Candice, you next, please.
Oh, hello, I'm Candice. I am an artist and I am a independent sustainability and regenerative business consultant. Very passionate about systems design and systems architecture. And through my art, I sort of explore stories around the 9 planetary boundaries, our impact on them and their impact on us. Thank you.
Thanks. Lalit, also from Canada.
Hi, I'm Lalit from based in Ottawa. I started my entrepreneurship career. I'm a serial entrepreneur, establishing with a couple of partners a solar energy business back in the 80s to manufacture and market solar home systems for rural people, and then sold that business. And then now I am I connect good businesses with other businesses on the investment side, ethical businesses. As well, my labor of love is I run leadership training programs based on mindfulness through informed by 40 years of a mindfulness, 50 years of a mindfulness practice. So helping leaders become more ethical through mindfulness practice. Thank you.
Thank you. And Lydia Stevens, please.
Hi, nice to meet you all. I'm a leadership coach I used to work in international development and sustainability and ran my own consultancy. I'm actually an entrepreneur and I love working on new things, but currently the challenge is the future of our planet, and I'm hopefully working with organizations and businesses to transform from a heart as well as a head perspective. So bringing in the emotional side of our beings and our decision making, and building that as part of the transformational change.
Super. And Robert Barnard Weston.
Can you hear me? I've got my pods in. I'm not sure if they're going both ways. You can. So yeah, like I've been in this game since the late 80s, consulting with businesses, governments, super governmental bodies, NGOs, universities. I was delighted having been named the grandfather of sustainability a couple of years ago after becoming a grandfather, to discover on meeting finally Paul Polman on the stage at Bath University School of Management that the work we'd done with Unilever way back decades ago into the last millennium had in some way begun a few ripples in a few ponds that started with one of the attendants at one of our programs, which was Mark Rutte, now Dutch Prime Minister, but then a Unilever middle manager in his 20s, and all acknowledged that this had some impact. And when he'd taken over as chief exec, some of the ground at least had been prepared for the great work that he went on to do, and is now doing with you, Andrew, and others. To this day, since he stood down from that role. So I'm very glad to have been a small pebble in a large pond.
And Sarah Flynn. Thanks, Rob.
Hi there. Hi, I'm Sarah Flynn. I'm a psychologist and a coach, and I worked for many years looking at resilience through change, and was sort of keeping my sustainability side quiet at home and not really using that in my business. And then I sort of just thought, this is ridiculous. I work with being in right relationship with self, other, and systems, and I care passionately about being in right relationship with the planet, and realized that I was speaking to more and more sustainability professionals who were struggling with the human change element, either their own sort of well-being as they were doing it to be able to stay on the pitch, or how to bring others along with them, how to change systems, and how not to sort of let doing really important purposeful work drain them and feel like it's either me or the planet, and I've got to sort of I've just got to do this, and my well-being suffering. So I really try and help clients to thrive while they're doing this important work. So I work specifically with sustainability professionals and change makers to really do that in a sort of very authentic, true to them, honoring their own nature rather than sort of working against their nature. And I've written a book. I'm a member of the Climate Change Coaches, really trying to bring these sort of human change skills into the hands of people trying to do wonderful work and perhaps struggling with that element.
Thanks. Tanya, have we had you? I'm losing track a bit here, so forgive me. No, we haven't. Tanya, please.
No, good evening, morning, no, afternoon, wherever you may be in the world. I'm based in South Wales in the UK. I'm a sustainability coach / facilitator / trainer / researcher, depending on what day of the week it is and who I'm working with. My background, I've been working, I've worked in the public sector and the third sector for 30 years in sustainability, but last year established my business Future Clarity to work directly with businesses, organisations to help incorporate sustainability, looking with a focus on leadership and organisational development. I'm also the lead for the Women in Sustainability Network here in Wales, and I'm currently chasing down funding for a PhD looking at gender leadership in the governance of sustainable development and climate change.
And Timo, I think you're the last one.
Hi there, bringing up the rear. Hello, Andrew. Nice to meet you. I am Timo. I'm based in Bournemouth on the south coast of the UK. I'm a music artist and a climate communicator. I have a big interest in art's place in making sense of the crisis and how it's conspicuously, almost completely missing. Interesting. I've written a book on that called How to Think Like an Artist and Change the World, based on my research with my little research cast, Unsee the Future. And I'm picking experiences for leaders and groups to think much more creatively and connect with much more soulful futures.
Thanks, Timo. And I think I am the last person. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Gwyn Jones, one of the directors and leaders at ASP. I guess where my interest lies at the moment is, first of all, intergenerational conversations, drawing upon Indigenous wisdom to give us a different perspective and guidance on where we're going. And I'm focusing this year on a simple theme of, if you want to do good or do well, choose to do both. So doing good by doing well. And I'm focusing that on SMEs and how their owners and founders can take agency, rather than listen to the science and the technology, just get down and do it in their local communities. So with that, we shall hand over to Andrew. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Great. Thank you, guys. That was really helpful, actually, to kind of know where everyone's coming from. So it seems like a lot of people working in the leadership, training, coaching world, which I think can frame, how we talk about this. I don't know, Gwen, if you wanted to start with any particular questions, or want me to just set the stage and what I'm seeing out there and in corporate sustainability. I mean, I don't think this is a big presentation kind of setup.
I think just take it from where you want, Andrew. I thought the last conversation we had in this was very revealing about what you've just been experiencing sort of at the coalface. So start wherever you like. We've got some questions lined up, obviously.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can just give, I guess, a few minutes. That was weird. Everything muted. I'll give you, I guess, a few minutes on where I think we are. Look, my angle is mainly corporate sustainability, and that covers a lot of ground. All heavy focus on climate and environment over the years, but increasingly the much more broad agenda, since they're all kind of connected. And I think in that positive, Paul and I, talk about a lot of different issues, but inequality and climate are kind of the two mega issues that frame a lot of our thinking. So let me, I guess, give you a sense of where I think we are from the kind of maybe the corporate perspective. So the last few years, there's been more change in what's expected of business, or what it means to be a business, than in the previous 20 that I've been in this field. And related to how many of you are working on the kind of personal coaching, what's expected of leaders, I think is in flux quite a bit. And so what do I mean by that? Well, the pandemic forced companies to take some actions that weren't just about short-term shareholder returns, right? They had to kind of think about their role in society. What were they doing for their employees? What were they doing for suppliers, customers? I think Claire's in the medical device world. One of my favorite examples is Medtronic in the US released the designs for a ventilator so that the big auto companies could manufacture them. It was just stuff that we hadn't seen happen. And companies had to change some things really quickly. I had, one big client say, there were some dynamics in our sector and our supply chain that we thought we had years to figure out, and we had to do it in weeks. There was just this deep change in what was expected of companies. And I think we saw Unilever and others, and Medtronic, I think a lot stepped up, actually did pretty well, extending credit to suppliers or customers, guaranteeing employees jobs for a while because it was so uncertain. But on top of that, like happens in history, there's been these moments that kind of all come together. The murder of George Floyd in the US created global ripples about race. The Me Too movement about gender treatment. In a few different countries, Canada in particular, Indigenous rights and Indigenous history issues kind of rose up. And what's happened, I believe, is that companies now, especially multinationals, but in general, increasingly have to have a position or some statement or view on the big issues of the day. I always say they have to get off the sidelines. There's really no sidelines anymore, right? They're in the middle of society. So they they have to have a position on climate and inequality and biodiversity and LGBTQ plus rights, racial equity, gender equity. Now, democracy itself, information and misinformation. I think AI now is going to bring up a bunch of questions that companies have to kind of figure out where they stand. And there's a lot of reasons why this is happening, but it's a combination in my mind of these kind of big mega trends, the exponential change in the world. And that's part of what makes, I think, for all of us humans, and I'm sure you can see this as coaches, it's really hard to understand change at the speed that's happening. We're not built for it, right? We are really linear people in a lot of ways. And I think about these issues a lot. I was kind of a quantitative guy growing up, and I struggle with picturing 1,000, 1 million, 1 billion, 1 trillion. Like, the numbers are hard, right? And so the scale of what's going on in the world is really hard to get your head around. And so the problems are moving exponentially. The inequality over the last 40 years, all of the wealth has gone to the top 1% or the top 0.1%. So the divide has grown. Obviously, climate is moving exponentially, but there's exponential good news. The cost of renewables and storage and other technologies has come down dramatically. So one of the main kind of ideas that Paul Pullman and I have in the book is that we've hit this tipping point. I think we did a while ago, but where the cost of inaction is much higher than the cost of action. And part of my mission in the world is to try to get companies to kind of see that this is not just, of course, we have to act on things like climate, but this is now incredibly good business because it's so expensive to not do this. And so on top of these kind of economic and exponential changes, there's just continued pressure from stakeholders. And the new addition in the last few years, part of the reason there's been so much change in this field has been the investors. I mean, I've been in this 20 years and they didn't care really at all for all of it until the last few years. And now ESG is the phrase because it's an environmental phrase. I mean, it's an investor phrase. I don't love it, but it's kind of the language everybody's using. And we can kind of talk about that. And in the US, there's this backlash going on, which I'm not sure how tangible it is for you guys in the UK, but it's a problem here. And now there's a backlash against the backlash. I mean, it's getting kind of muddy, but the investors are at the table. Clearly, businesses are pushing on each other, much more scope 3 concerns about what are our emissions in our supply chain. But the two really big challenges that I think are the mega trends that I think are driving this, and when people ask me, is this temporary or could this go away? The two that I think are immovable are the rise of transparency, just the demand to know everything, what's in every product, who made it, were they paid a living wage, on and on. And the generational shift. So the millennials who are now entering middle age, as much as they don't want to admit it, they're no longer super young. I apologize to millennials. I've been talking about millennials as young people for 15 years, but the older edge, according to demographers, are 40, 41. They're no longer kids. Gen Z, I have 2 teenagers, but the older Gen Zs are entering the workforce, and they clearly have different views about the role of business in society, very clearly. And to me, that's the number one change, because real change happens when norms change, right? It's happened repeatedly in abolition, women's right to vote, civil rights, climate, LGBTQ plus equality. And these things seem to happen really quickly, but there's like 40 years building up to these tipping points where something happens. And so the norms change because generations change. And so that to me is only going in one direction. And we're seeing the backlash of people who are, pissed off that they have to change or that the world's changing. The fossil fuel companies are still pretending they care, but are trying to fight it, So I think the movement is real. It's not going away. It's muddy. It's ugly. The attacks on democracy in my country in particular are terrifying and real and could undermine progress on all of this. But all of that is to say that things are moving. They have to move. And we need companies to really step up and be thinking much bigger. And that's part of why Paul and I wrote this book, Net Positive, to kind of set the bar for what companies should be thinking about, and that the goal should be to improve the well-being of everybody that they touch. And I won't go into too many details of what it means to be a net positive business, but I'll just say quickly, once we kind of lay out the principles of it up front, the first chapter we have on, okay, here's how you start to build that kind of company, starts with the self. And the chapter's titled, How Much Do You Care? And this was really important to Paul and his thinking, and has always been for me too. And it starts with that personal leadership. Who are you? What do you feel a duty toward? Why are you? Why do you exist? The question we ask in the book fundamentally is the world better off because your business is in it? And I find that really makes people stop for a second. But the underlying question in a lot of ways is the world better off because you're in it? You know, and I hit 50 at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was, as many of you, some of you may know, it's a kind of big moment. 40 was big, but 50, I don't know. It's like, oh, wow, I really am mortal. But there was this sense of like, what am I doing here? Right. And I think this leadership question, I think, is evolving from how did I improve the earnings per share last quarter to what am I leaving? What's my legacy? And when I've talked to executives over the years and tried to study a little bit, like what makes leaders change, because we need to change views. Long story short, I've discovered the business case, the data, it helps, but it's like everything we know from behavioral psychology. You need the data after you've kind of already decided what you want to do. And the reason often leaders have decided to take on sustainability is it could be as simple as they went somewhere, they went to the rainforest, they went to the Antarctic, they saw it. But often it's just their kids talk to them, you know, like the typical leader of a company now has a millennial at home or a Gen Z, and they're being asked questions, and even by their employees. And I think that's affecting leaders. But the principles of leadership that we lay out right away in this kind of caring is having a sense of duty and purpose, trying to kind of walk the talk and be an inspiration to organizations, believing in deep partnership. That's kind of critical to being net positive. You have to be believing in transformative partnership. And that means being open to the idea that NGOs or governments understand what they're doing. They're not idiots. They're not anti-business necessarily, that there's this different players that all bring different things to the table. But mainly we talk about courage, that courage kind of overlays it all. And I think we're seeing a huge test of courage all over the place, but right now in the US in particular, but at all companies. Once, you know, Russia invaded Ukraine, there was the decision of, do we do business in Russia, right? Like there's a huge moment for leaders. What are you going to do? And we're seeing those kinds of challenges, you know, come up for leaders. So I think courage is the big one. And part of what, you know, I think we believe and talk about in the book is that you can create like a collective courage if a sector or a bunch of leaders come together and can feel safer, right? I mean, it's weird to say this about CEOs who get $15, $20 million a year, that they need to feel safe, because they certainly have been paid enough to be courageous, but they're actually, I think, less courageous with all that money. There's almost like there's more at stake. And so like they don't push back. I mean, we saw this once Trump came in. He was clearly a bigot and incredibly dangerous, and CEOs just got quiet, right? He called in the tech billionaires in the first few months to meet with him. And I thought, if Bezos can't push back as the richest man in the world at that point, well, who's going to push back, right? But they all kind of just stay quiet. So I think there's a need for courage, right? And that means there's collective courage, but there's also just being forced into it. Your stakeholders, your employees, your kids, whatever, just demand it of you. So that's a kind of some rambling thoughts for 5 or 10 minutes. Happy to hear kind of what your take on it is. I mean, that's my view from kind of the corporate sustainability world. I'm happy to talk about the backlash or policy stuff if you'd like. I can't answer. Whenever I've been in meetings where I'm like one of the only Americans for the last 6-7 years, I get asked to explain Trump. I cannot. I don't know how to, or what's continuing to happen. And it's actually maybe getting more dangerous because his style has metastasized. And you now have people like Governor DeSantis in Florida who may be more dangerous because he's actually smart. I think Trump only failed to take over permanently because his narcissism and incompetence got in the way. I think it was close. The coup was closer than people realize. Like it was a coup attempt. So anyways, I think we're in dangerous times in the US. I know, Brexit hasn't been fun either, but these are hard times. So I'm happy to just discuss. I mean, Gwen, if you want to do the
I've got
stuff,
Rob,
but I
you've
see
got your hand
Robert raised his hand.
Thank you, Andrew. That was brilliant. Actually, Rob, it's so hard to summarize these enormously complex and long-term developing systems, intergenerational change. A question that you inspired me to ask is, if we're going to help to affect change from whatever position, be we, members of the board of global corporations or consultants to them or whatever, is it your view that the best way to do this is to empower, say, the Gen Zs to step forward and have more of a voice, or is it to go to those people still sitting in the CEO and C-suite positions?
I mean, I'll punt and say yes. It's both, because here's the problem. This is what worries me, and for obvious reasons, is that I talked about these deep transitions we've had in society. And the reason it takes decades is that the old views have to die out. And to be blunt, I mean literally die out. Like the people who vote for the old way have to die. And that takes a long time, right? And so we have this problem now with climate in particular, that we don't have time for that. So we don't have time to wait till Gen Z are the CEOs and partners, because that's 20 years from now, right? And so yes, we need to enable them. And I mean, I encourage any companies that will listen to me to go listen to younger voices. I used to say, like, you should have a take a millennial to work day or something. I find that millennials first and now Gen Z, they're not shy. I mean, I've heard from executives, they'll say, well, millennials really expect this of me. I'm like, how do you know? And they're like, well, they just tell me. Like they'll go to a office or a factory and the young people walk up and say, here's what we think. I think we need to enable that voice more. It is, it's a little unfair, obviously, that we're like, well, Greta Thunberg and the rest will save us, like, because we're still in power. So this is the problem, is that we need to change the views of people in power. And that is hard, right? I mean, that is really hard, because the way every successful business person or politician, the way they got there is in the system that's killing us. And so how do you, and this is something that, who's that Dutch economist who challenged people at WEF a few years ago, and it went viral, like said to them, like, it's great you're talking about all this, but no one's questioning the system that you've all, made money on. And he brought up taxation, like we should have massive taxation on the wealthy. It's very hard to get people to question the system that they have done very well in. And that's the challenge, right? So I think we have to do both. I think we have to somehow empower young people, but I mean, if they just showed up to vote, I mean, if 18 to 30 voted the way 65 plus did, the world would be completely different. And yet it never seems to happen. I saw one good news story recently that it appears that millennials, by and large, are not getting more conservative as they get older, the way every generation has. They're so far not shifting. And it sounds stupidly obvious, but I guess if you are basing your party on bigotry and non-inclusiveness, it ticks off a generation that's not all white, right? And not all male, and not, like it's hurting them, but like, it's going to be really close on this, like autocracy versus democracy. Like it's not coming down to the wire. So we somehow have to do both. And it is really challenging. I don't know how we change. I mean, everyone knows change is hard, right? You guys, a lot of you work in change and coaching. It's been the study since whatever, Aristotle, like, how do you change? It's not easy. Mindfulness is, I think, a big part of it, bringing awareness to everything you do. I try to bring that, but I don't know how we do it quicker. I've chosen my path, which is to make the kind of combined business moral case, give people the data, the information they need, but it's tough, right? It's hard.
Lalit, would you like to?
Thank you, Gwen. Andrew, excellent sort of to get us to provoke our thoughts here. So yes, you said quicker. I don't think there's going to be quicker, because I'm getting more and more invited to do EDI programs, where it has become the flavor right now.
Yeah.
And I'm going into organizations who seem to be now doing it by instilling fear. If you don't do this, we're not going to be recognized. And recently, I did a program with our utility company here, all macho big men, white men who came in there. When I walked into that room, a couple of them didn't even say hello to me, because they thought they were going to waste their time. So what I professed to them was, look, we need to. I told them a few of my own stories first of all, and then I said, as an immigrant to Canada, this is how I was welcomed, and my welcome was getting beaten up on the street as a 14-year-old and told to go back home to where I came from. So for them, they were shocked to hear that, and here I am. I'm still talking to them 50 years later, and so I made them feel a little uncomfortable about all this, and then I set the stage to have a compassionate dialogue. I said, look, all of us have biases. All of us have these unconscious biases that we come with. So I believe that we have to have a compassionate approach towards all this, towards the old guard too, because if you create that woke kind of shaming people, canceling people and all, that is not the way to go about this. That creates more resistance. So I think we have to take a compassionate approach, and a mindful approach too, because I know through the mindfulness practice, I know from experiences of others too, that when we become introspective, we quiet our minds and we get off the left brain and can kind of smell the roses, we can put things in a better perspective, so we can respond rather than react to situations. So I believe even with ESG too, I'm getting involved in the ESG space too with organizations. Again, there's huge resistance in this whole area of having to fill boxes and fill questionnaires and all that tedious stuff that's been thrown at people. It's taking time away from their productivity. So how do we find that middle ground to approach this is my challenge. Yeah. And I believe that compassion is one way to go about it. Any thoughts from you, Andrew, on that?
I struggle with this. I try to bring empathy to everything, but and I think we should start from empathy and compassion and understand where the fear and backlash is coming from. But there's this fine line where we need empathy, but at the same time, that doesn't mean accepting bigotry and hatred, right? Like, so it's like you can empathize with where people are coming from and empathize with the fact that propaganda works. They've been somewhat brainwashed, right? There's the Brexit people, the MAGA people in the US, there's been brainwashing, but it doesn't mean empathy to the point. I think the problem is sometimes there's this sense of like, people confuse empathy with middle ground, like we should just find the middle and just everyone's welcome. And it's like, but there's no middle between like neo-Nazi and liberal. Like there's that's not a middle, right? There's just, some of the stuff is just right and wrong. And we have to, I think, maintain, and I think about this also in terms of like in organizations, in companies that are struggling now as they're pushed by right-wing politicians and they try to hide or not, they don't want to get yelled at. And I keep telling people like, but there's also just right and wrong. Like if you say you're going to be quiet because you don't want to tick off, the right-wing people in your employee base and your customers, fine. But if you don't act on certain things, you're going to tick off everybody else, right? And so I have this attitude that, if you're not sure how many people you're going to piss off, depending on what you choose to do, then just do the right thing, right? So I think we should have empathy for people, but zero tolerance for bigotry and intolerance, right? And they use this woke stuff. I mean, it's amazing how good they are at turning words into bad words, when woke just means like being aware of someone else's circumstances and not being racist. Like it's not all that complicated, but they've turned it into this bad word. And, and they keep doing that, right? They're doing it with ESG now. They're doing it, they've done it with sustainability. Look, propaganda works, right? It's incredibly powerful. It's so much easier to tear down than to build, right? It's so much easier to maintain the status quo than to change. And that's the challenge we have in sustainability. Is it's a longer story. It's a harder story. The neoliberal story of no government, small taxes is really easy because it makes no sense. It doesn't actually work, but it's really easy. And people complain about Democrats, liberals. We don't have our 8 words. We don't have our, that's because there aren't 8 words for building a sustainable world. We can use words like thriving and flourishing, but to describe that takes a little time. And so we lose the soundbite battle. So I don't know. I just went off on a riff there, but I don't know if I answered your question. But that's kind of what I think about yes, empathy. We have to start from there, and it certainly makes your life better. It makes my life better to start from a place of empathy and just go. Someone who's that angry is coming from a place of pain, but I still don't want them in power. I don't want them having a vote. I don't want, like, we still have to defeat them, but we can empathize.
Thanks, Andrew. Keep riffing, by the way. Jagdish, you have a question.
Thank you, Gwen. Andrew, I wanted to ask you whether we have reached a stage where some conversations are required on the merits and demerits of capitalism itself. So are you situating yourself largely within the capitalist model to say that now I'll try and fix it, or I can't fix it? Or are you saying at the end of it, the model has failed and we need to relook this? The Academy of Management recently published a special issue, Rethinking Capitalism. So there's a lot of that voice around.
Look, it's people use a lot of different phrases, stakeholder capitalism, conscious capitalism. I don't know. I mean, look, capitalism is a tool. It's a system. It's a system of equations. I don't think it's necessarily the problem. In theory, if you priced things, capitalism would work pretty well. You price carbon, you price water, you price inequality. I mean, in some way, and that's kind of what's building. I mean, look, I'm not surprisingly, I'm a progressive. I believe in democratic capitalist socialism, like in Scandinavia. I think that seems to be the most effective combination. They're clearly still capitalists. There's companies, there's people making a lot of money, but there's just a much larger safety net and higher taxes on the wealthy. It's really not that complicated. And so I don't think capitalism is necessarily the problem. It's just that it's been weaponized, right? It's been bought and sold. I mean, we in the US have legalized corruption. It is absolutely corruption. It's just above the table. You can give as much as you want to candidates. It's legal. So I think if you look at capitalism as a tool for matching goods and services, for efficiency, it's great. It's just that we haven't priced stuff. So when people claim free markets, what they really mean is freedom to extract rents and externalities. They don't really mean free markets, which is if you price everything and then let the market work, it probably will work fairly effectively. I go back, we talk in the book about the misunderstanding of both Darwin and Adam Smith. And Adam Smith's Invisible Hand, actually, if you go back and look at it, was written through the lens of his moral sentiment essay, right? It was about the invisible hand would actually yield more equality of resources because it would happen more naturally. That's the context of it, actually. It wasn't invisible hand so that every man for themselves, right? So we've gotten a lot wrong in the way we built it. But yes, we have to question so many of the pillars of modern capitalism, and in particular, the metrics, right? GDP is stupid. I mean, we know this, it's ridiculous. We need well-being. We need a different set of metrics, and then judge how is capitalism achieving those ends. We've got the cart before the horse now, right? Neoliberals won in getting people to believe that the metric that matters for companies is short-term shareholder value and share price, and the only metric for society that really matters is GDP and the stock market, instead of like well-being, right? So how do if we build well-being into the purpose of society, then capitalism can be a tool to get us there. But I mean, it sounds overly simplistic, but a lot of it's just taxing a lot. I mean, that's just, as I think it was AOC, one of our favorite progressive politicians in the US. I mean, she's super talented, said something like, she and Bernie Sanders will say things like, billionaires are a flaw in the system or something like that. It's kind of true, right? Like nobody needs that much. So yeah, we need more progressive taxation and systems that build the safety for everyone.
Cool. Helena, you had your hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Gwyn. Andrew, I just want to say thank you so much for your opening introduction, because I think you're right that it's very easy to be overwhelmed by what's going on. And actually what you painted was, and I think it's worth painting with COVID, was how much cooperation. I mean, we got a vaccine. I was thinking today at the university, I got in the lift and I was thinking about in COVID, I couldn't get in the lift. And when you think we did a vaccine in a year. So,
right.
so I really welcome that. And I just wonder to share your thoughts with us. I mean, I teach now, but I'm a community development worker by background. All my life was working with communities to help make their community a better place. And as you rightly pointed out, particularly on biodiversity loss, we don't have a lot of time. I'm very conscious in my back garden in Manchester, there are hardly any insects. I just know they've gone. I also know the birds are kind of hanging on in there, the songbirds. So I just wondered, Andrew, do you have any thoughts about how we can build this movement of ours across? And I really welcome that you're speaking, from a different country. How do we kind of maximize, given the really tight timescale on biodiversity and equality? I just wondered if you had any thoughts, and obviously maybe particularly to do with business, but I just wondered what thoughts you have on that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I have to admit that I've spent less time writing about or trying to say something about biodiversity in particular, because I honestly don't know what to say. It's terrifying. And arguably, we could overshoot on carbon and then have technologies that bring us back. Like carbon you could come back from, the waters could recede even if something covers, but like biodiversity loss is permanent. And that's the scariest one. And I agree with you. I mean, I've seen talks about if all the ants die, like we die, like there's a bunch of those things that are kind of scary. And we don't really know what happens when we've killed all the coral, which is coming. It's hard. It's really hard. I think I don't have good answers to this, except that we clearly need to raise the level of understanding of connectivity and systems, and that we're part of a system. And I know there's mindfulness folks. I've been listening to a series of interview podcasts with the Dalai Lama, and how he just has this like refrain about we're all connected, we're all one, we're 8 billion people. And that really is the core answer to it all, that we have to see that we're connected. And this is what's so dangerous now about what social media has done, and misinformation and the division that it's created, is people seem to think we're not all connected anymore. And it's nuts. We cannot solve any of these problems if we're not on the same page, and realize that, one major system going down affects all. There's no hiding from these things. So I don't have an easy answer for how some of the answer in the business and governance community is to put a price on natural capital. And I think that's important. Those are the kind of tools that get financial people and bankers to kind of understand it. But there's just a general moral, and, it's not, it's funny. I don't come from that much of a moral perspective. To me, it is actually eminently practical that you don't want to tear down the pillars of your society. I think you can take an incredibly practical view that, of course, you don't want biodiversity to decline, and you don't want climate change because it's incredibly dangerous. So I don't know how we speed this up without getting some kind of pricing in the system. I think you're starting to see things like buildings or homes or places that are uninsurable in some places kind of helps move the needle on, this is what it means. If we don't manage this right, it just becomes impossible to live in certain places, and that's part of the answer, but it's really hard. Again, it comes back to I think younger generations would move quicker. But they're not in power yet. So I don't mean to sound like a downer, but it's, I think those of us trying to go, we're going as fast as we can, but it's just clearly, it's not fast enough.
Thanks. Sarah, you had your hand up a minute ago. Do you still have a question?
No, it was just about sort of it's almost the essential elements of good giving feedback that actually is really helpful, I think, in having those difficult conversations and towing that line between compassion and saying no, stop. And it's kind of almost like a little micro example of it is with my children. You have to say no, stop, that's not okay.
Right.
You have to speak your truth and say what isn't all right. To be loving doesn't mean tolerating and putting up with and rolling over,
right,
or subverting your voice, but it's about having that true voice and then having a way to come back from, this is the stake in the ground, this is not. And I think we really struggle with doing that and think that if we're going to be honest, it's challenging or it will split the relationship. But actually, I think we need to be a lot better and stronger at saying the truth, our truth, and hearing the other person's truth. And from there, with that connection, we can come back. Not always. It's not easy, it's messy, but I think there's something really important about that in being able to speak our truth.
Yeah, it's just quick reaction to that. The problem is, what if their truth is a lie, right? Like, this is something we're dealing with now that we don't have a good answer to, which is their truth. If you mean the way white guys feel like they're getting left behind, or they're being attacked, all that, that's their truth. But you see it turned into racism's worse on white people, like those kinds of statements. Like, that's not truth, right? Like,
no.
That's crazy. And so I don't know, this is always the challenge, right? How do you deal with, that's maybe not a great example, just climate stats, like the fact that people are just still saying it's dubious or it's not clear, or, there is kind of right and wrong, and there is,
yeah, absolutely.
And we've lost so much of that. Look, I've said this to many people. I think Facebook is the most dangerous company on the planet. I think it's one of the most dangerous forces on the planet, because it's just making misinformation easier to access and dividing us. And they make money off it, right? The best way to keep people clicking is anger. That's what they've discovered. So they make us angrier and angrier. It really is a recipe for total dissolution of society. It's amazing that they keep getting away with this. And it's affecting our kids. I have 2 teenage boys. It's not easy time to be a teenager. I think it's pretty brutal.
Thanks, Andrew. Laura, good to see you back after an absence. So what's your question? You're muted.
Yes, thank you very much, Wing, and thank you very much, Andrew. It's a fascinating subject. No, I just wanted to thank you for the time to give me here, and I just want to give some positive feedback from any would have moved here, because obviously we can get lost in all the bad news and all that, but there's some areas with no one hears of. And just 2 months ago, I decided to live my life in the UK after 28 years as a project manager for IT. Financial software, because London was absolutely killing me. The last year has been absolutely merciless. No one would help anyone. My company was making me work 18 hours a day, and that was a charity. And I was about to have a heart attack, and I was 55. So I came back to a part of Spain, which is in southwest of Spain. Well, it's called Cáceres. The village is called Villanueva de la Vera. It's been made very famous from a film about bullying, which is called Piggy, and it's been, you've seen it. It is. I've been absolutely amazed, because I was working here as a teacher 28 years ago, and I had to go because it was unbearable. And suddenly, in a population of 2,000 people, 400 people came back to live back into their lands of their grandparents. Everyone is going to agricultural old methods, traditional methods, and there is an unbelievable sense of community, 70% of the people in the village are just doing permacultural projects, are building their old houses. My house was built in 1845, you know, and I've made a bit of an anthropological museum in there because there's nothing in the village. And everyone, the last weekend, I was with 10 people. We didn't know each other at all, 7 different nationalities. And what we do is just we made turns to help each other in each other's lands, prioritizing, you know, the women, single women with children, and the elderly. And I was absolutely, you know, I can't believe that I left a very big salary just to living here. And I've never feel happier, you know, and it's wonderful just to be surrounded by so many people who have such good intentions from anywhere in the country. And everyone is just starting from scratch, you know. Everyone has been, they were the rebels in the 80s who left after the dictatorship and the culture died. And now everyone is just going back to say, hey, you know, we've tried it all and it doesn't work. Consumerism doesn't work. Materialism doesn't work. Pollution is everywhere. And these people are just combining, but I'm helping them to combine technology with technological advances with all permaculture projects. And I did as well as when I met Win very kindly invited me to this, because a couple of years ago I started an IT ecosystem called amirural.com, and it was based basically in that. I've been analyzing the different components in Scandinavia, the schemes in Japan, in Holland. And basically I put everything together, the way people is now living here in the old ways. I'm being extremely happy. The elderly are always traveling. We have a traditional party, 500 women were wearing their Manton de Manilas. Everyone is tremendously healthy. And that, with my project, I'm a Rural, I just connected all those ideas with friendly software and an app where everyone can just go back and link and go to live back like that, and creating groups and sharing everything. And it's working wonderfully. So if you want an update or an invitation,
I
but
love Spain.
just to say, you know, just on a positive side, you know, if it helps.
No, it's good to hear. I mean, I think there's so many great stories at the local level, at the small level, where people really can work together well. It's just we've created such divisions now that people don't get that we are connected. You know, we are all one thing. I think Timo is.
Timo, please do.
Yeah, thanks for that, Laura, and thanks, Andrew, for your reflections. I'm interested to know the individuals that you're meeting, the rooms that you're in, where somehow you've got the lovely images that Laura was talking about at local level, those visions of the future that seem quite local. I'm interested to know how much the people you're meeting get that this is cultural. The thing that opened this all up for me as an artist was actually coming to it through something creative that made me realize, like waking up, this is all just symptoms of the story we think we're in. So where are the alternative stories? That's kind of my bag. How do we change the story we think we're in? How do we write with design fiction or whatever the mechanism is, storytelling, lots of things. How do we show joyful alternative futures? My question to you is, how many leaders get that or any sense of that?
Well, it's interesting. When asked, so you're speaking my language now. I think after years in this field, what I've realized, the fundamental hurdle is not making the business case. You can over and over again, but people will kind of deny it. It's story, right? It is the narrative that we're in, and the narrative that we're in is the neoliberal created one, that your purpose as a business is shareholder value above all, which is ludicrous, right? I mean, it's clearly a community, it's part of a community, and that a country's completely measured by GDP, which is a horrible measure anyways. So I do think this is all about story and narrative, and how do you change that story? So I feel like my real mission now is not so much getting companies to see business differently, which is there. It's more identifying this story that's in the way and trying to destroy it and write a different one. And I think the arts are critical. I mean, as kind of silly as it was, the Netflix Don't Look Up, I think did a lot for climate change discussion in its kind of farcical way, and especially for those of us in the field. Like, I was like feeling like, oh, the Leo DiCaprio character was me. Like when he loses it at the end and says, like, we can see it. in the sky now and people still aren't acting. That's what I feel like for the last 5-10 years is like, guys, it's happening right now. Like the climate thing is happening. And there's, we're letting the stupid voices kind of stop us. So this is all about story. And look, this goes back to my point about like changing stories takes often generations.
Yeah.
And at least I think the surveys show, the data shows that Gen Z, you ask them like what a company should be about, their story is kind of different. It's like, well, of course it should solve environmental and social issues. Of course it should support LGBTQ, like it is a different story for them. And it's, how do we get the new story to dominate, right? How do you make it clear that it's a better story, right? It's a more enjoyable story. I've tried to do more and more of that in my talks and writing, is to kind of not just dive into the details of you got to cut emissions and whatever, but like, what are we building towards, this thriving world? What does that look like?
We need, yeah, exactly. We need visions of what it actually looks like. So instead of we shouldn't be trying to come up with the 8-word soundbite for complexity. Right. We should be showing pictures.
Right. We show,
creating experiences.
And the story, I've opened most of my talks in the last year or so. It's weird, but I start with a picture of a few different cities with perfectly clear skies. And it was the second week of April in 2020 when everything had stopped. And if you remember, there were pictures all over the world of cities you could see, clean, New Delhi, Beijing. I have this picture of LA, it's gorgeous. And I use this to say to people like, look, stopping the global economy is not how we get to clean economy. But we rarely get a chance to see what the future could look like. And this is what it looks like. If we power everything renewables, we're using bikes and public transportation and all EVs. This is actually what it looks like. And that's within our grasp. We don't have to live in smog-filled cities that are unhealthy. We can live in this better world. And then we can imagine that those cities also are paying living wages, and the farming community supporting those cities the communities are doing well. Like we can start to picture that world rather than just dive into the details. So we have to keep telling a better story. The problem is in business, like you have to talk about how they're going to grow and profit, and that still has to be so core to it. And that's a challenge. It's a balancing act. I've got like maybe a few more minutes. I got to run back to the stuff I'm doing here. So maybe take like, I don't know, Gwen, if you want to take one more or wrap it up, or however you want to do it.
Well, thanks a lot, Yo. Got to be respectful that Andrew is actually sitting in the middle of his office and has probably clients around him. Lydia, you've got your hand up. So let's have the last question from Lydia, please.
Oh, thank you. Just about the business side of nature and funding nature and biodiversity, and how we're going to really, as who was it? Helena said, biodiversity is sort of not always seen as interconnected to the climate story, and how to really get that as something that business can fund and it doesn't make a profit.
Right. Say that again. Do you say doesn't, or does it make a profit?
Well, I mean, biodiversity doesn't always make a profit for business, but it is a nature solution and a carbon sink, and it's often not seen as such or not funded as much. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I do get torn about that. We want to use the language and tools of capitalism to kind of bring people on board. But when we try to convert nature always into dollars, there is something off about it, right? There is something like, well, we get a lot of medicines from nature and clean water. And yes, you've seen estimates, the UN, others have put estimates of like, nature is worth $100 trillion. It's like, no, nature's worth infinite. Like the fundamental aha of my life really was when I made this transition 20 years ago into sustainability. And the first thing I read was Ray Anderson's book From Interface. And he talked about his spear in the chest moment from reading Ecology of Commerce. 1992, like 30 years ago, Ecology of Commerce is, I kind of looked at it again recently, and it's brilliant, right? I mean, in a way, the stuff I've been writing it was said, like it captured, here's what business is in society and in nature. I'll tell you a quick story that I've had in one of my books, which is I was at an event years ago where the late Ray Anderson was there, and a kid stood up and said, I'm in business school. How do I know if my professors know what they're talking about and care about sustainability? And Ray Anderson said, draw on the board, draw a square with a circle inside, and ask the professor which one's nature and which one's business. And to me, the fundamental aha that is still shocking almost every day for me is that, like, we're inside nature, right? And like the donut stuff is really perfect about this, that we're a subset. Like the entire economy, our entire existence is a subset of nature. It is so weird that we have to keep repeating that like to remind people that like the building I'm sitting in, everything in it was either grown, mined, that's pretty much it, right? Like mined or grown. Like it's from the earth. And so it's weird that we have to try to keep putting numbers on the infinite. And we're getting into similar conversations about climate. Swiss Re and other insurance companies put a number on how much GDP is lost if we don't tackle carbon. And those numbers are helpful. They're, Swiss Re's estimated 18% loss to GDP over the next 30 years. That's a lot, but it's an average, because the problem is not 18%, which we could live with. It's that in many places it's 100% loss. It's the city's not livable anymore. It's too hot. It's underwater. What is the ROI? What is the return on investment of not going to zero? The problem is when you divide by zero, you get infinite. And so like, we don't have the tools in a way to monetize everything. And there's got to be at some point inherent value in the system we're in and in nature that we don't have to prove every dollar of it. So I'm writing this long piece now that I'm struggling with, and I'll end on this, which is that there's a bunch of things in business that just become second nature. I call them like, of course we do that, right? Like, of course we don't want kids working in our factories. 100 years ago in the UK and in America, every factory had little kids. Now, of course, we don't want that in our factories. And there's all these things that move into the of course. So in business, it was quality and safety in the late 20th century. Now I think diversity and inclusion is moving very quickly into the of course we do that, even if we don't have proof. And I feel like part of my job is to get things like decarbonization, living wages, the pillars of sustainability into the category. Of course we do that. Now let's just compete on how we do it. Let's find the cheapest way to do it. Like, it's not questioned every step of the way, which it still is, right? We need a perfect return on investment on everything. And that's the problem with protecting nature. It's got to move into the bucket of course we do that, right? Of course we are net neutral on biodiversity and land, right? And of course we're trying to be regenerative. We have to move it into that category. And it comes back to everything we've talked about. A lot of that's generational, right? I think Gen Zs get it. If they don't give up, if they don't think like it's too late, screw it, I'm just going to go have some fun, then, we can listen to them. All right, I'm sorry, I do have to run. It's been fun. If you have any, burning questions.
Thanks a lot, Andrew.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.